And so good morning and welcome to this webinar that's been sponsored by Law at Work on Wellbeing. It's very good to have your company. We're just seeing participants joining right now. We're just going to give it just a couple of moments in order that we can get as many of those who've registered joining this webinar this morning very shortly, brought to you by the Jersey Chamber of Commerce. And as I say, under the sponsorship of Law at Work, and we're very grateful for them for doing so. It's very good to have your company. Thank you very much indeed. You'll notice there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, which you're able to access at any time so that you can ask any questions to any of the panelists. And we'll get to the Q&A section very, very shortly. Let me introduce to you, first of all, the guests that we have in front of us and that you will be able to ask questions to. And I'm delighted that we have Jenny Winspear, Consultant and Product Development Lead for Marbral Advisory. Welcome, Jenny. Hugo Forrester, the Operations Manager at Mind Jersey. Joe Moynihan is the CEO of Jersey Finance, and Dr. Chris Edmond is the Medical Director of Work Health Jersey. And they all join us right now. Also, you'll see our sponsor there is Heidi Schipper, the Group Managing Director at Law at Work. Thank you for your support and sponsorship. And at this point, I'm going to hand over straight to Heidi to introduce the webinar and to welcome everyone. Heidi, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Mary. Welcome, everybody. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the panelists, because I know that giving up their time is a really good thing to do, especially when it comes to wellbeing. I mean, we've been working with many organisations over the last few years who are making the shift from actually measuring input to output. And one of the things that we found is by coupling that and placing that wellbeing piece at the top of the people agenda can actually change your results quite dramatically. So Law at Work are delighted to be sponsoring this event. Together with the panelists, I think we're all quite passionate to ensure that wellbeing remains at the top of the agenda for 2022. And I think that if we can all bring our best self to work, as Glenda said in the last one, that it can only be good all round. So I'm delighted to sponsor. I'm looking forward to listening to this webinar, and I'm going to hand you over to Jenny.
Thank you, Heidi and Mari, for the introduction as well. And Mari, would you mind bringing those slides up on screen, if that's okay? We've had some technical issues, so Mari's going to drive the slides for me, and I'm going to say next slide. And we've also gone a bit fancy and got some polls involved. So I'm hoping you're all keen to participate and answer a few questions. Don't worry, they're not hard. So that's great. Okay, I think we're seeing the notes here, Mari. So I don't know if you perhaps wanted to pop it on presentation view. There we go, perfect, great. So I'm actually going to start you off with a poll to check you're all awake and participating. So we'll go to the first poll. Hopefully that has launched and you're all seeing that. I'm seeing some nods from panelists, thank you. So I've got two questions here that I want you to have a think about and answer. First of all is, do you feel that the last 18 months have impacted productivity and growth? A, in a positive way, B, in a negative way, or has it stayed the same? And then secondly, do you think workplaces in Jersey could and should be doing more in the wellbeing space? Now there is a yes, no, and unsure. You have to scroll down for the unsure. So have a look at that. Whilst you're answering those, Murray, if you mind skipping to the third slide, it should come up with a quote, which I'd just like to share with you all. It's from Steve Flanagan, who is the commercial director of Bupa. And I really like it because it talks about how health and wellbeing is sort of what their vision is at Bupa. So I'll read it out to you as you're answering your questions. Improving the health and well-being of our employees makes good business sense. As a leading provider of workplace health services, we see every day the difference it can make to a company's bottom line and the impact it can have on employee morale and motivation. It offers a win-win all round. Employees benefit from better support for their health, companies benefit from less absence and improved productivity, and society benefits from improved public health. Now, I really like it because it kind of gives not only that micro view of how it impacts the employee, but that macro view of how it contributes to us as a community and a society overall. So I thought I'd start us off on that while you're answering. I see we've got 82% participated, which is great. I am going to end the poll so that we can have a quick look at the results, and I need to end it to share with you. So if you have a couple more trickling in now, it's pretty good participation rate. Share those results. Has that come up on your screen? Yeah, great. Perfect. So this is really cool. I like to do this because these questions are useful to get an understanding of the impact of the last 18 months. We've gone through so much change in the workplace, the main one being working from home, but I always find it interesting to show that there are differences of opinion on how this has impacted productivity and growth. Often when you're going through change, productivity does tend to dip, which is why we're probably seeing that a lot of people have said that it has impacted us in a negative way. But it's really encouraging to see that, you know, everyone thinks that we could and should be doing more in the wellbeing space. We had no one who said no. A couple of people who were unsure, which hopefully, if you've answered unsure, I can change your mind by the end of this presentation. Great, let's get that poll off the screen now. Let's figure out how to do that. Stop sharing. Perfect. Are you back onto screens? Yeah, perfect. Thanks, panelists, for being my moral support there. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please, Murray. Okay, so why is wellbeing important to organizations? I just wanted to share a personal reflection on this question because I used to work in Australia, and we delivered interventions on the wellbeing and cultural area. And often when we did pitches and tenders and basically were bidding for work with organizations, because you have to sort of win the work, show how you're going to make a difference. A lot of what we focused on was exactly what we were doing, how it was bespoke to their organization, you know, what was the groundwork we'd done before and what's it going to look like in future if the intervention was successful. I have found since coming to Jersey, there's a lot more of a push to make the business case for wellbeing. So although in the UK and further afield, often people are already bought into this idea, yes, wellbeing is important. Of course it is, you know, we have to do it with our organizations. I do find in the Channel Islands, it's sometimes a bit more of a challenge to make that business case and for people to really appreciate that it's not just fluff. You know, wellbeing is important. It does affect the bottom line. I was once told by someone that you can make a point and you can shout your opinion as loud as you want, but people can always dismiss it until you put data, facts, and evidence in front of them. So I wanted to share these facts with you. They're some of my favorites, and I'm not going to read through them all. If you've been to any of my talks before, you've probably heard some of them already because I do use them. I think they're really important for people to use, especially if you're either a wellbeing representative or if you're a senior manager who wants to get your colleagues on board with wellbeing. These are the kind of things that you need to make that business case and to make sure that it's not just this fluffy thing. So I'll touch on three because they're, you know, three good ones and especially relevant to this topic. The first one is top left there. 80% of nearly 9,000 respondents to Deloitte's Human Capital Trends identified wellbeing as important to their organization's success. I like this one because it's from a very reputable source. It has lots of respondents who've answered it and a massive majority of people thinking that wellbeing is important to the success of their organization. It's so pivotal. This is the employee voice. This is what we're wanting to hear. So that's one of my favorites. Feel free to use it. Another one that I really like is second down on the right. It's from PwC. They looked at return on investment and they tried to understand the link between wellbeing initiatives and what it actually can result in for the business. So they found that for every £1 spent on wellbeing initiatives, it can result in a £2.30 return on investment. I like this one because it relates to money. It's very good to use with executives who maybe don't understand or don't appreciate how it can have that impact. But when you say things like, oh, it affects absenteeism, it affects attraction, you know, it affects retention, this is it, putting those benefits into a monetary value, which I think is really important. The final one I wanted to touch on, and based on the topic of this conversation today, is that bottom right one, just down in the right there. 63% of employers who offer wellness programs reported increased financial sustainability and growth. And those with highly effective programs are 40% more likely to report better financial performance. And I think that's so relevant to today's topic, because it really shows that wellness programs are not just a nice to have, they're actually really impacting the bottom line. So next slide, please, Murray. So I'm going to talk to you now about a case study, and hopefully most of you are familiar with the organisation SAP. I have talked to my finance friends and they say that SAP runs a lot of their products that they use. So even if you're not aware of SAP, you probably are using them at some point in your business. They are a software company, like a software corporation, and they basically have wellbeing as a strategic priority. And I want to tell you some of the things that they offer, because I think it's really great to cover. So SAP offer on-site health services, including a return to work program and health training. They foster a healthy workplace culture through health and wellbeing awareness campaigns. They run employee success stories. They showcase SAP initiatives around the world. They have a health ambassador network, which offers employee wellbeing support. They also support parents with daycare programs and on-site childcare with a host of other parental and family support. They have flexible working options. They even run something called a dinner to go program, which lets employees order healthy pre-cooked meals they can pick up after work, among a host of other things. And so you're probably wondering, why am I telling you about SAP other than making you want to go and work there? And this is because SAP measures how employees are faring in terms of well-being, and then they analyze business outcomes against it in a yearly survey. And it's great for demonstrating the links between investing in well-being and in corporate productivity and growth. They have this survey called the Business Health Culture Index, and they found that each 1% change in this index delivers a 90 to 100 million euro impact on their operating profit. So I think it's really great for illustrating how it impacts growth and productivity. And they've demonstrated by looking at correlations between the Health Culture Index and the operating profit, they've demonstrated that link. So I think it's a really great case study to bring this relationship to life. There's also a number of other, positive things that have come out of this. You'll see I've listed them there. They won the Best Places to Work award from Glassdoor. They've seen higher employee engagement, better leadership trust, lower absenteeism, and they found that employees who take part in programs have reported great job satisfaction, more mental clarity, and improved creativity. So I think it was a really good case study just to illustrate that link. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to now talk to you about the Channel Islands Wellbeing Report, which is something that we ran last year. The attention behind it was really to understand what wellbeing looks like in the Channel Islands, because we're seeing research come out of the UK and America and lots of stuff being done, but actually we didn't know if there was anything specific to Jersey or Guernsey that we needed to have a look at. So one of the intentions was basically to get that data. It's the same thing I was talking about, making the business case for wellbeing. Once you know where the problems are or where your strengths are, you can either run interventions to improve those things or capitalize on where your strengths are. So having that data and measuring wellbeing is really important. And, we wanted to look at that from a Channel Islands perspective. We also linked up with a number of different organisations, and as part of the project, we gave them back just their information. So they got to have a deeper dive on what it looked like at their organisation and then have a look at it as an industry overall. So that was really good. And actually, it was great to see lots of organisations taking part and being really encouraged by this data. Next slide, please. So in case you missed last week, just a quick zoom into the demographics. Oh, sorry, Marina, last slide. We had about 690 people participate. It was open to the public generally and also the organisations I discussed earlier. We did have a majority in Jersey, majority in financial service, as you probably expect to see as well. We had a good spread of role, actually. If you think about an organisation, you probably have lots of more employees than you do managers. And so it was a good spread that we had of role. Next slide, please. And then we took a look at the organisational findings. So Glenda last week talked about at the individual level. So this week I'm just talking about that sort of top level. What were the findings that were really key? And I'm going to read through these, but I'm going to talk around them. So hopefully it won't be too boring for you. Let me read off the slide. So first key finding was that just over half said the importance of health and well-being was consistently reflected in senior leaders' actions. Now, as most of you are probably aware, leadership is really important in terms of role modeling. It's a really key thing in embedding well-being as a cultural aspect. And what we found was that only half, and I say only half because I feel like this is an area that we could really work to improve. You know, if leaders are not representing well-being in the right way, if they're not taking care of themselves as well, other people are not going to think, you know, that the employees that work for them, it doesn't create that understanding that this is acceptable. It's okay to put yourself first. So I thought that one was really interesting. The second finding is a question that I see all the time in employee engagement surveys, and it's really important. It tells you a lot about how the employee feels about the organisation. The question is, would you recommend this organisation as a great place to work? And the reason it is so good because it tells you, it gives you an indication of turnover. You're probably safe to assume that those who would not recommend it are probably likely to be tempted to go elsewhere. And also for in Jersey, especially, and Guernsey, where word of mouth is so key, this is a really important stat to look at. So we found that 17% of those surveyed would not recommend their organisation. And although this seems quite low, I think if you think about your own organisation as a whole, if you knew that 17% of those people could be at risk of leaving tomorrow, it would be a stat that feels really important. So we then looked at, out of that 17%, we wanted to dig into it a little bit. You know, who is it that didn't feel valued, and where did not have employee wellbeing as part of their mission, vision, and business objectives? And as you can see from the slide, 87% of those that did not recommend their organisation also did not feel valued at work. And 70% felt that employee wellbeing was not part of the organisation's mission. So I think it gives a good light, and this is what data does. You can drill down in it to really understand why is it that people are saying these things. So our key finding 3, 68% felt they have the right level of autonomy at work, which is encouraging. Autonomy is important for wellbeing. People need to feel like they're not being micromanaged. They need to feel like they're competent in their role. So that's key finding 3. Key finding 4, half of those surveys felt their organisation has a positive influence on their happiness. Now, again, this is a stat. It's like, okay, it's half. That's not too bad. My thinking is that people spend so much of their lives at work. We just went through COVID where we weren't allowed to do anything that we usually would, you know, take our minds off work. We were so focused on doing the job, and then we were still at home and we were not getting out and, you know, changing up the kind of stimulation that we're getting. So people reevaluated what the workplace was to them. So I think this stat is another really key one to understand and to get insight on your organization and the impact it's having on people. Finally, key finding 5 was around the organization taking proactive measures to make sure that employee workload is realistic. So we found 11% said that the organization does take measures to make sure the employee's workload is realistic all of the time. And 30% citing that it either doesn't happen or they are unsure. Now, we know that workload is a massive contributor to stress. It can make people really unhappy in their jobs if they feel like they're working all the time, not getting anything done. So this is another thing that's really important. And I guess my summary from discussing these findings is just what data can reveal to us. I think it was really good to do this and to get an idea of what wellbeing looked like in the Channel Islands. It's the first time we'd ever kind of surveyed it from an island perspective. So the point to take away, I suppose, is that getting that data can be so meaningful. Next slide, please. Okay, so just check you're still engaged and listening. I've got another poll for you, which I think I can launch now. Will that come up? Oh, I don't have the option to share the one. Murray, do you have the next poll on your as a choice?
I will endeavour to find that one, which should be somewhere. I think because I'm screen sharing, that might be a difficulty, because I'll have to come on screen share.
I'm still sharing. That's okay. It was. I will skip it. That's no worries. I'll just if we move on to the next slide.
I can probably bring it up afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, then we can still do it afterwards.
It's certainly on the main poll. I'm just going to see if we can. Is that poll number 2? Do you think the workplace in Jersey should be doing more as a welcoming place?
Yes, that's the one.
There we go. That should be up there right now.
Can everyone see that one? No.
I think it's because we may have ended that poll, and that's
no problem. Let's we can see if we can bring it up after the presentation, because I suppose we don't need too much, but it's an interesting reflection piece.
In fact, I can take you through. Do you think that the last 18 months have impacted productivity and growth? Of the 100% that answered that, 8% said in a positive way. I think that was question 1, and we've gone through that one. Do you think the workplace in Jersey could still be doing more in the workplace? I think 96% said yes, they should. Nobody said no, and one person, 4%, said unsure. So there was the results on that.
Thanks, Murray. Next slide, please.
We'll do that.
I'm asking you to do too much, sorry. It's a lot of switching between screens.
Multi-skilling here.
You're much better than me at Zoom, so appreciate it. So now I just wanted to round off, I suppose, with some key wellbeing challenges, because we ran a workshop not that long ago, I think it was at the end of last year, and we basically wanted to talk through the findings from the Channel Islands report with a number of HR leads. We had some senior managers there. We had wellbeing representatives. It was a fantastic group of people, and I really loved hearing all their thoughts. But we basically asked them, what are the key wellbeing challenges that you're facing at the moment? You know, what in Jersey is really coming up a lot of times? And then we worked with them to figure out, well, how do we start to solve them? So here's some of the results. Again, I'm not going to read through everything. If you do want a copy of these slides afterwards, by the way, I'll put my email in the chat and you can email me and I'll send through the slides. But basically, they came up with some things like work-life balance, which is one of the things that we surveyed in the report. Getting participation for employees. How do you generate that buy-in? How do people see it as something that's not fluffy? Engagement from leadership. You know, leaders are so busy already. How can we add another strategic priority to their agenda? Diversity. How do we get diverse groups involved and be mindful of them? And then also the capacity and capability of leaders. So yeah, I think these are all really important. Some of them maybe ring true for you guys as well. Maybe you're seeing them in the workplace. And there is some great ways to come up to start addressing these. There is another poll, which maybe we'll get after this slide, because I am finishing up now, that sort of asks, you know, what are the areas that you might want to look at first? And I've put some suggestions down there so you can have a think about what could have the biggest impact on improving well-being in your workplace. But just to round off at the end, I've got some key takeaways for you. And I like doing things in 3, so there's 3. First of all, well-being impacts the bottom line of the organization. I hope this is a business case that people are beginning to accept, but please use those stats in your conversations in future, because it helps make it not fluffy. But the benefits are only realized when it's rooted through strategy and lived through culture. We don't want these band-aid approaches, you know, a yoga in the boardroom, which does get a bad rep because it can be very good for you, yoga in the boardroom, but, you know, not the band-aid fix that we're looking for. Secondly, the only way to demonstrate the effectiveness of organizational well-being is to start to measure and evaluate. If you don't do it, it's unlikely to ever get resource allocated, and it's very hard to know where your risk areas or strengths are. Then finally, and this kind of touches on our conversation from last week, as more organizations lift their well-being game, it will be hard to compete for talent, because people are coming into the workforce and they want that work-life balance. They want to be looked after by an organization. They want to feel that they're part of something. So it's important to consider how to do it within your workplaces and start to see the positive benefits on productivity and growth. So that's all from me. I'm excited to hand over to the panelists now. And Murray, over to you, really.
Thank you for that, Jenny. Thank you very much for taking us through that, very much indeed. As you can see, we've got Dr. Chris Edmond, Joe Moynihan, will be back with us in a second, Hugo Forrester, and Jenny Winspear is staying with us as well. And just to recap on the poll that we did there, I read an erroneous poll that was in there as well. There were 3 questions that we managed to list up there, and I believe I can show the results of those. And hopefully you can see them on your screen now. I'm looking at my panelists to say yes or no. If you can, the wellbeing poll question 1, 2, and 3, and I'm going to scroll down to number 3 because that's the one that we haven't discussed yet, which is, which area do you think could have the biggest impact on improving wellbeing in your workplace? Thank you to everyone that took part in that. Leadership support, training and wellbeing strategy at 64%, employee voice, as in engagement and measurable data, 16%, the environment, the physical environment, 4% said that. Reward and benefits, just 4% in reward and benefits, which is quite interesting. Dedicated resources, again, 4%, and culture, as in policies and values, 8% there. Jenny, do you want to just comment on those? Because having got those results up there, is that where you would see it?
Yeah, I was really interested actually, and thank you all for participating. It's really good to see this. Yes, I think it is. I think that leadership support, it has been key. I've seen it come up with a number of my clients, you know, and it is because leaders are often the busiest, and it's about that business case again. I mean, Joe's a fantastic role model, being at the top of the organization and really endorsing wellbeing, and it's so great to see. But you often see other workplaces don't have it endorsed at those highest levels. So yes, I'm not surprised by that. But also employee voice. This is something that definitely comes up a lot of the time, and often people don't know, you know, how do we get that measurable data? Where do we even start with this? So I appreciate that as well. No, it's really interesting to see.
Right, stop sharing that screen for the moment and come back to everyone who's back with us. It's, thank you very much indeed, people who've been chatting. Actually, Joe, I'm going to bring you in first there, if I may, because we're just referring to you there and Jersey Finance. Now, how many organisations do you think are actually measuring productivity? Because that's something that businesses are really after, is productivity and effective productivity. Are they measuring productivity effectively, and are they making well-being part of the growth agenda?
Well, I can't tell you a number, Murray, because clearly we can't do that without proper research about surveys. But I can share with you some work that Jersey Finance did a couple of years ago on this productivity puzzle, if you like, which has been challenging both economies and businesses for quite a long time. We did some work with the Centre of Economics and Business Research, CEBR, who we've done work with before, to look specifically at the financial services industry in Jersey to better understand the areas that we think should be focused on, or indeed the businesses that deliver most productivity are focused on. And CBR came up with 5 key areas, some of which actually resonate quite well with Jenny's presentation, where they talked about the importance of work-life balance, and that certainly the businesses that show most productivity are those businesses that have been able to get that work-life balance right. Jenny produced some interesting stats, but there's a lot of empirical research that shows that average productivity is negatively correlated with the average number of hours worked in lots of different areas. So that's pretty important. And this work-life balance for all businesses now is really key, because that is what people strive to achieve. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has highlighted is that for many people, the work-life balance was all wrong. And I think the demand for people now, as a consequence of the pandemic, will see a major shift in terms of how we manage our organizations and how we manage our people. The other area that, one of the other areas that the CEBR work highlighted was this area around diversity and the need for organizations to embrace diversity in its true sense and not just give it lip service. Again, the more productive businesses had very good policies and very good practices around diversity. And indeed, as a jurisdiction, I think with the work that has been done by a number of bodies, we have moved forward on diversity. I think perhaps we have got a little bit further to go. And the other thing that CEBR highlighted was the need to measure productivity. And a lot of Jersey firms do, a lot of finance firms do measure productivity. They look at hours work, they look at people work, both on an individual, a team, and a divisional basis. And it's important to measure the productivity levels, and then that allows you to identify where you can make improvements. And that those type of improvements can be in the work-life balance area. It can be in greater engagement with staff and with individuals, and on the diversity agenda. I think that we think that the productivity work that we did highlighted for us a lot of areas that we weren't aware of, I guess, but it also pointed to some of the best practices. And as I said, highlighted 5 key areas. And for the discussion this morning, the key areas relevant are work-life balance, diversity, it's about measuring productivity, and engagement. And I think that from our perspective, I think in our industry, there is a lot of work going on in terms of measuring productivity, but it does vary across the sectors and the subsectors. And one thing I think that's quite important, I think I mentioned this when we did the interview with Marbral last year around this whole area, is that looking after your staff is nothing new. Good businesses have been doing that for years. In our management and organizational behavior training many years ago, there was a lot of discussion around service profit and the service profit chain. And the service profit chain is a very simple concept. It talks about employee satisfaction with the organization, driving good customer service, driving good customer loyalty, which ultimately drives profit. Now, that's quite simple. What, in my view, has changed quite a bit is customer satisfaction is much deeper and much broader than it has ever been. And I think that that's where if there's a management mindset that needs to change, or a leadership mindset that needs to change, that's the key area. What might have been great for me when I started off my career is no longer appropriate. So we've got to adjust, and the demands of employees now is much broader than it has ever been. And I think that that's the challenge for leaders and for business managers, to be able to understand and adapt their business models to the requirements of the new employees. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer to a simple question.
I don't think there's a simple answer to it, Joe, but I think you covered that really well. And I think that, it's really interesting that the poll and what you're saying here really points to leadership, and it being one of the real qualities of leadership today, which perhaps was not a quality that we saw in leadership in times gone by. And that's not saying that leadership was wrong 20, 30, 40 years ago, probably only 10 years ago when you started out in business, Joe, obviously. But when we
like you, Murray.
Yeah, we both like that, Joe. But I think that, it's interesting how the emphasis of what real leadership today is required is different to that of years gone by. And thank you for that, and thanks for encapsulating that. Chris, I'm going to come to you if I may. Just before I do, there is a Q&A box at the bottom. We've got people watching us, and they will have their thoughts on well-being and perhaps their questions or their comments. Go to the Q&A box at the bottom, drop it in there, and the panel is here and quite happy to answer your questions. Of just those thoughts we've got in there, Chris, Dr. Chris Edmond, to give the full title. Chris, poor health is something that every business wants to avoid. And of course, the employer wants to avoid that for many reasons, but mostly for the well-being of their employees. So in terms about the health impacts of in the workplace and the bottom line of productivity, from a medical perspective, what are the telltale signs? What should we, one, be looking out for, and what should we be eliminating?
Well, I think it's worth broadening out the discussion a little bit, Murray, because we talk about productivity in terms of the individual output per hour of time worked at work, essentially, and that's very much where the well-being that we're talking about comes in, because people are far more efficient if they're well and they're healthy. But if we expand it to the island point of view and looking at the economy as a whole, then you've then got to look at sort of labour market participation and how much time are we getting people into work that necessarily that could be in work and could provide productive value to the economy. And I think that's where the health side of it comes in the first place. We know that on the island, we've got about 4,500 people claiming long-term incapacity benefits. In terms of short-term time off sick, there's about 500,000 days taken off sick out of our 60,000 workers on the island. So on average, each worker is taking about 8 days off sick on the island each year. And if you think of productivity in terms of getting people into the work and maximizing the hours that they're able to work, maximizing their skills and what you're able to get out of them. And it comes back to that diversity question that both Joe and Jenny touched on, that if we look at disability and if we widen our view of what people are able to do at work, and if we think in terms of maximizing capability, then I think that's the mind shift that would be really useful in terms of leadership from a health point of view. Is everybody has something to add, and if as a leader you're able to bring out those values and those skills and those experiences of your staff, number one, they will stay healthier at work, but number two, we also get people back into the workplace who currently are struggling, and if you add in a degree of flexibility so that when people are off sick, we get early intervention to get them the medical help that they need, we can get them back into work earlier, then you don't result in that long-term worklessness and those skills lost to the economy.
Fallen into the trap of being on mute at the same time. Thank you.
There you are.
You make some very good points there, indeed. And I'm going to bring Hugo in just to that point there, because we talked about diversity both in the last two comments there. Hugo, we saw diversity as a key consideration in the HR leads at the moment. What practices do you recommend to address this challenge? I mean, what should we be doing here?
Well, I'm honoured to get this question, because this is like the golden thread, isn't it, between everyone's presentation. And I have to say that evidence suggests that organisations approaching diversity have fallen foul of the tick box exercise, and that diversity not done correctly can actually be detrimental to organisations' development and productivity. So we need to bring in inclusive practice. So diversity and inclusion are a bit like the strawberries and cream or the gin and tonic of our organisation's success with wellbeing. D&I is an absolute cornerstone of wellbeing, and we've touched on the benefits that it can bring. You know, creativity within the workplace, increased productivity, better engagement and retention, more innovation, and more awareness of risk. And as far as practices go, let's shift the mindset. We are talking about inclusive practice. That is where the focus needs to be to make this true cultural shift and success and improved well-being for employees. So just picking up on the key things, leadership is obviously a big part of this. It came up in top of the poll, and each person has touched on it. So our leaders need to be role modeling in recognizing and valuing inclusivity, but not only that, offering personal contributions. So really aligning with that and sharing their own experiences of why it's important to be an inclusive organization for the benefit of unique personal identities. And that really fits in with an inclusive culture means a positive sense of self, nurturing a positive sense of self. And that looks like encouraging and celebrating unique identities. Chris touched on it, valuing unique contributions. So if you imagine people's identities, we're looking at intersectional thinking. So we're looking at, for example, each person having multiple aspects to their identity. For example, a white person can be alternatively abled, they can be neurodiverse, and they can be gay. Now, each one of those are individual, valuable characteristics that they bring to the workplace. And why shouldn't they bring all of those aspects to the workplace and be celebrated for it? We find that about 75% of people will cover up some aspect of their identity. That raises to about 94% of people within racial minorities, and 60% of those people say that it is detrimental to their well-being in the workplace. So we can see quite a clear correlation between bringing your true self and your Heidi mentioned bringing your best self to work, but even better than that, bringing your whole self to work. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, it does very much. Very a very wide range, and we could spend a whole program just on that. So, yeah. I think perhaps that's something for the future. Question coming in, and this changes the emphasis from that. So, excuse the juxtaposition of this, and it's from Danny. Danny, thank you for the question. Really appreciate it. It's in the Q&A box, and you may have said I may have asked this one before, but it goes back to if you like the pound, shillings, and pence of this. What should a typical budget be for well-being? As a business development manager, it's part of my role to sell the well-being idea to my board, and the standard percentage would be a lot easier if I was to be able to say to them, look, it's going to be X amount that we need for this. So by all means, jump in there. Do you think there should be a budget? And if there is a budget, is there a sweet spot for a percentage there? Anyone can take this one. Jenny, Joe, whoever. It's a tough one to answer, I guess, because it's going to differ for every place. But anyone? Hugo, back to you, and then I'll come to Chris.
I just want to advance Jenny's stat on a return of £2.30 on investment in wellbeing. If you invest in people's mental health, the return is £5. So I often find when we're talking about mental health and well-being as offering training from Mind around D&I or mental health first aid, that usually gets people's attention. As you said, it hooks people in because there's a big return on that. So just consider that when you're thinking about your budget.
Thank you. And Chris, I'll let you come in, and then I'll go to Joe.
Thanks, Murray. I think it's a really difficult question to answer, and I'm not sure it's one that we should be looking to answer in sort of separation. We know the things that affect well-being in the workplace are primarily good leadership, good management, good communication skills, empathetic listening, and job design, and more often things that are fitted in the HR space rather than the pure well-being space. And if we don't take that sort of strategic view of well-being, you end up with the sticking plaster approach that Jenny mentioned earlier. So we shouldn't be thinking of well-being as a tack-on additional budget that's separated. This is a core business function, and it's as core as your finance function or your IT function or anything else that you do. And it runs through the business in its entirety. And if you get this right, then you get your approach to your customers better. So the customer experience improves. If you look after your staff and they live the purpose of the business, and their purpose and their identity is aligned with the identity of the business, then that's where we see the massive gains in productivity and efficiency. And we take out the ill health that we see from damage that's done in the workplace. So I think I would be very careful to put well-being in a separate pot. And what I'd much rather see, it was a key strategic priority that runs through the entire business.
Thank you, Chris. Joe.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much, Chris, because you covered a lot of what I was going to say, because this is not something I think that is dealt with separately. It's about your culture as an organization. It's about your leadership, and it's about your management, and a lot of it. And my concern would be to say, if we set a figure and say we need to spend X% of our HR budget on well-being, one of two things happen. They allocate the funding, and we think that's it. We've done it now because we've thrown some money out, and that's not what you want. This is much broader than that. So I'd almost, if you put a number on it, you potentially have two issues. You have the issue that we put numbers beside it, we've allocated some money, it's fine, everything's under control. Or you frighten everybody off and say, gosh, we've got to do all this, it's going to cost us that amount. Chris is absolutely spot on. It's much broader than that, much deeper than that. And I would be very worried about putting a number on it.
Thank you. Jenny, I'll let you come in here.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say as well, because I know it's hard to think, okay, how do we start incorporating wellbeing? How do I bring it to the table? And one thing I would suggest about where to start is thinking, where are you now in relation to wellbeing as a strategic priority, and where is it that you want to go? Because that helps guide what actions, whether they be labelled as wellbeing or whether they be labelled as business development activities, that guides you as to how much time and resource you need to invest in it. It may be that you're already doing quite a lot in this space and it's already a value of yours as that part of the organization, and really there's not a lot of change management that needs to go on. Or it may be that this is a completely new concept to people. You need to run some training and awareness for your leaders to make it a cultural thing. So I would say it's one of those things of knowing where are you starting and where do you want to go. That's probably the best approach to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Great question, actually, because it brought out and drew out some relevant points there. Is there a point in looking at the, I don't know, 78, 80% of businesses in Jersey who are small businesses, 1 to 5 people, 1 to 10 people? We talk about larger, and I think some of the emphasis here, you get the impression that it's a larger office, a larger enterprise. Does it scale down? I see you nodding your head, shaking your head there, Joe. Does it scale down to the 1 to 5 in terms of being able to incorporate well-being into the everyday working practice? Jenny?
Yeah, I've just got to, my reflections of this are, it's sometimes easier to make change in smaller teams and also to hear that employee voice. So where you're thinking about what wellbeing looks like in the business, I think it's absolutely necessary for any size business. But it's sometimes the way that you approach it and manage it can be very different from a small scale organization to a large scale. For example, you might not need to do an anonymous survey to reach as many people because you have that time to be able to sit down with your group of 10 and get their feedback about what they would like to see in the organization, what's making them happy, what's making them stressed, those kind of things. You can actually get down into the depth of it. So I would say probably the approach is different, but it still definitely needs to be a priority for everyone if you want to retain your staff, get the best out of them and help them achieve their best selves at work as well.
Yeah. Okay. The hands lit up straight away. Joe, I'm coming to you next.
Yeah, I agree with Jenny. I think the idea that this is only for organizations of a certain size is a big mistake. And I think a lot of the really successful small businesses are on this anyway. They don't even know that they've got well-being under control. It's just the way they manage their people. And they are aware of the need to do all of the things that we've talked about already. That's why they're successful small businesses. They won't be, given the demand for people, if they're treating people badly, or if people, it's much easier for them to move and leave. So I do think it is scalable downwards, and I think a lot of our small businesses have this area very much under control.
Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Joe's just said, but I'd actually take it a step further. And I think that large businesses can learn from smaller businesses, because the key to this is understanding your people. The key to this is understanding people as individuals and building strong relationships. And you find in some large businesses that the spans of control that line managers have are just too broad to be able to build those relationships and understand their people. And I think the difficulty is moving from being a small business to a medium business to a large business. And it's those growing businesses that find it a particular difficulty, because as the demands on that sort of middle management level grows and the pressure grows to hit targets and everything else that comes with that, you lose that personal touch. And I think what businesses have to focus is reintroducing that personal touch. You find in lots of small businesses, the well-being comes naturally. They all go and play football anyway. They all socialize together. You build those relationships, and it's trying to take a lot of those values that exist in small businesses and replace them and sort of regrow them in those larger businesses that have lost them.
Thank you all, and thank you for answering the questions that we've had today. And I appreciate some of the presentations that we've had as well, which have been really good. And I also know that people have time commitments as well, so we won't keep people too much longer. But what I wanted to wrap up with was actually, where do people turn for help at this point? We've heard some very, very good points being made today. Jenny, I'm going to come back to you first of all. people will always be concerned that they're doing the right thing. And I don't want to go back to the sticking plaster analogy too much, but how do you know that your well-being is working? How do you know you're doing it properly? Because the worst thing in the world is to think you're doing well-being well, and you're actually not. So where do people turn for help?
I will always fall back to the data, and it is my bread and butter, but it genuinely gives employees that voice. And as I say, it doesn't have to be a survey. I hear a lot of complaints, survey fatigue, how are we going to keep doing this? There's 100 questions in the survey, but that is the best way to reach a large amount of people and to get back solid data that you can rely on, because it is your employee voice. So I would always say, if you want to manage it, you have to measure it.
Yeah, and I'm seeing nods all around from that as well. Is there a little bit of buddying up that can be done? Good examples of good business practice in the realms of well-being that people can learn from?
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, I always look to what other organizations are doing as well. You can have a Google, see some case studies, including SAP as an example was that, just to illustrate that point. There is a lot of businesses doing good stuff out there, and they like to shout about it as well. So it's definitely worthwhile sort of having a look at what everyone else is doing and sort of keeping your finger on the pulse. If wellbeing is something that is not yet supported on the organization as well, that, you know, Marbral offer wellbeing services as a consultancy. So it's always good to get that external advice if you really don't know where to start internally as well.
Hugo, I'm bound to give Mind Jersey a plug on this as well. I'm sure there is advice that you have to hand.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for the plug. Yeah, absolutely. So mental health, again, is a very significant and important part of well-being, and that's our bread and butter. So, you know, we offer lots of bespoke training as well as mental health first aider training, and that is a critical part of implementing well-being. And we can help you with a mental health strategy within your well-being strategies in organizations. So yeah, hit us up.
Excellent. There's plenty of offers, and I'm sure there are plenty more that we could. If I went to Chris and Joe, we'd get much the same answer as well. Thank you all very much indeed for your time today. I really appreciate it. We wish everyone a calm and peaceful Friday, as much as it can be, and an enjoyable weekend, whatever you're up to. Thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you for registering. And there will be some follow-up to those who have registered, in order that we can send out slides to them and more information on all of the facilities that are on offer. From the Jersey Chamber of Commerce, and from our sponsors, Law at Work, and from all of our guests, we wish you a good day. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mary.
Great, thank you.